everybody. January of 2020. It's the beginning of a new year. I wanted to get this done really at the beginning of the month, but it did not happen. Typical. That's the way things work out around here. Anyway, what I wanted to talk to you guys about is homesteading head first. I know you've probably heard me say that in a few of my videos, and I'm going to continue on the idea so that maybe I can help somebody that's just starting out, or maybe you're kind of feeling like you're overwhelmed at this point. You never know, because some people go into things and they think, well, we're going to get a big piece of land and we're going to have chickens and goats and sheep and horses and cows and, you know, on and on and on and on. And then you get into the middle of it and you look at and you go, oh my gosh, you know, I'm overwhelmed. I don't know what's going on. I've got chickens that are laying eggs everywhere. Everything's dirty. Everything's, you know, constantly out of food. I'm just struggling to keep the day-to-day stuff done. You know, what can I do? And the best thing I can tell you to do, tell anybody to do, is to reassess. And also, when you're starting out, one of the most important things to do is to go slow and be aware. I am not a naturally organized person. You can see this probably by this crazy shelf behind me. I've got like 50,000 different projects started at the same time. I'm in my command central, I guess you could say. We have a little tiny house, and this is a little teeny tiny bedroom within the little tiny house. When I first was living here the first round, this was my sister's bedroom, and it's a bedroom that is big enough for one twin-size bed and one dresser. So it's a very, very small room. These days, it's my computer room slash homestead office slash, you can see it, sewing room slash craft room slash incubator room slash whatever I need it for. It's a teeny tiny space that does way too much and ends up full of way too much, and it's always a struggle to keep it organized. But I try. I try to keep it organized because I know that if I need a, you know, spool of red thread, I need to be able to lay my hands on it when I need a spool of red thread. I don't want to have to go to the store to buy more thread, and so forth, so forth. The whole homestead is that way. You need to be aware of what's happening, aware of the money you're spending, aware of, you know, are you making any money? Is this even worth it? You know, why am I, you know, crawling out of bed at, you know, 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the morning and going out and wallowing around in mud for 30 minutes before I go to work every day? You know, am I even doing any good here? You know, is there a reason I'm keeping these chickens? It's like, why am I having to scoop poop at, you know, when I don't feel like scooping poop and I'd rather, you know, sit back and watch a movie with my family or whatever. You have to know what's going on and why. And like I said, not being an organized person myself, I was forced into this. My husband is not a homesteader. He never would be a homesteader. He just is not that person. When I met my husband, I was like 17 years old. Well, take that back. I was 15 years old. Met him in school, fell in love with him, still am in love with him to this day, which, you know, that never happens. Married him when I was 17. We've been married for 40 years, okay? And he is just not a homesteader. He's not that man. Now, I'm hardcore, have been. I've been born and raised around animals. We had chickens when I was little bitty. My mom literally bought me a pony before I could walk. You know, that's just who I am. Now, you wouldn't ever think that those people could mesh and go together, but it works. And why it works is because I like to grow food, raise food, cook food, and, you know, have animals to enjoy and be a part of and be a family with, you know. And my husband likes to eat. And He enjoys being outside. He enjoys watching the animals and, you know, having them around him. He likes dogs really well. He tolerates a tremendous amount of just, you know, the dirt involved in having a homestead, and the mud involved, and the weeds involved in a garden, and, you know, all of that. He tolerates it. He doesn't have to have, you know, this manicured perfect lawn. Like I said, he likes animals. He's just not, you know, when he comes home from work at night, and he's always gone to work every day and come home from work, and in a lot of ways, by the fact of him being that steadfast person, it enabled me to learn what I needed to learn to actually function on a homestead. You know, if I had to worry about actually feeding myself for those first few years especially, it just wouldn't have happened. We would have starved to death and died. That would have been the end of the story. But because he's always been the one that's got up in the morning and gone to work, brought home a paycheck, made sure we had groceries, made sure we had health insurance, stuff like that, I've been able to explore. And he's allowed that creative, weird, warped part of me that wanted to have a homestead life. And I have had a homestead life. I've been homesteading in one way or another since we got married, and that's been in 1981. So that's a long, long time. We lived in our first apartment that we lived in was a townhome. We were, you know, moving into this apartment place, and they told us that we were in an end unit, and they said that they allowed people to have flowers and stuff between the house and 4 feet away from the house. So me, you know, because I'm insane, first thing I did, you know, we went to my mom and dad's house and got a truckload of horse manure and, you know, bedding and whatnot, and I drove it back to the apartment complex, which is just down the road from my parents' house, and we dumped a whole truckload of manure and compost on my 4 feet. And I'm sure that everybody in the apartment complex thought they were being, you know, invaded by some kind of insanity. And probably if I lived in, you know, California or some other place, the zoning people would have, you know, immediately smushed me. But because it's Missouri, people are a little more laid back. And they said, well, you can't just have poop sitting there, you know, you've got to do something with it. So, you know, I told Mom, yeah, I'm planning on tilling it in because I'm having a garden, a little garden right there. Oh, okay. And then all the neighbors kept coming by to get, you know, some fertilizer for their pet rose bush or whatever that they had in front of their apartment. So it all worked out. You know, nobody went to jail. And the short story, you know, long too late, that first year that we were married, I planted tomatoes along that little strip of land, and I had tomato plants that were like 10 feet tall and just covered with tomatoes. And that was in an apartment complex. And when I was a kid, we'd had gardens and things, but, you know, nothing to speak of. I was more motivated than anybody in my family to garden, other than my grandma, and my grandma was a rose gardener, a flower gardener. But as far as growing food, that was just not her thing either. So don't ask me why I ended up the way I am, but it's the way I am. So we started there, and then, like I said, we lived in an apartment. It was a 1-bedroom townhome, and, you know, I was used to having animals, and we had a cat. That was it. We didn't have horses, and we didn't have chickens, and we couldn't have. And so that first year, you know, I was working too, and my husband was working, so we both had full-time jobs, and I was bored to death. And before we got married, like I said, we'd had animals, I'd raised dogs, we'd had a lot of things going on in my life that normal people probably don't. But I kind of got used to that lifestyle and that stuff, just being a country kid. And so I started getting myself busy. I sewed. I learned to knit. I learned to can. And we had a farmer's market by us, so I would go get vegetables and things at the farmer's market and bring it home and can it. And I cooked. I learned to cook. Like I said, my husband likes to eat. the more I would cook, and he ate good food. He liked that part. He liked the fact when I learned to bake bread. You know, I was going on through a bread kick like a lot of new homestead people type do. And, you know, because homesteading is not, this is a very important thing, homesteading is not where you live, homesteading is how you live. And I firmly, firmly believe that some people just have the homestead mindset. Some people are not into having the most newest pair of shoes and the biggest, fanciest car. They want to perfect that sourdough loaf. You know, they've got that need to create and that need to grow and develop and to be something other than what the typical sheeple in the world are today. They may not need, you know, to pinch every penny and squeeze every dime, but they do it because it's kind of a challenge. It's kind of fun. You know, we found out, like I said, you know, you can go to the farmer's market, and one thing my husband loves is sweet corn, and he likes the, you know, the farmer's market sweet corn. If anybody's bought it, you know, when they pick it fresh and it's on the cob and it's sweet like nothing else is sweet. And he never had really had, you know, too much like that. His parents had gardened when he was a kid. His mom had canned, so that was not totally alien to him. But it's like she canned, you know, 50 quarts of green beans. She wasn't like into the, you know, more extreme canning stuff that I did. My grandma was into making jams and jellies and baking, and really a good cook. I mean, really a good cook. And, you know, my husband had never eaten things like that before, and so it was kind of an awakening for him when he met me. So when I started canning and making jams and jellies and homemade breads and things like that, he kind of liked that part. He kind of liked it. But, and he, like I said, he was familiar with gardens, but he hadn't had that fresh off the cob corn. And, you know, when he got it, he was like, wow, this is really good. This is better than you can buy at the grocery store. Just like a tomato that you pick fresh off of the vine outside of your back door, whether it's grown in a little pot or whether it's grown in a, you know, 50-acre tomato field, it is the completely different thing than the tomato at the grocery store. The tomato at the grocery store is round and red and in some ways resembles a tomato. The tomatoes that you pick outside your door are amazing. They have depth of flavor. They're just delicious, and you can taste the nutrition in them. It's not just something you're chewing because it's a red tomato and it's supposed to be in your salad. It's actually a flavor experience. It's something that's delicious and amazing. And same way with the corn. So I could buy the corn at the farmer's market, and the first thing I learned to do was to blanch it and freeze it, you know. And that's a you know, a undertaking when you're a new, you know, not even 20-something person working full time, and you know, make the trip to the farmer's market, and you come back and you have your sweet corn, and you know, learn how to cut it off the cob, which was one thing that was like, that's an experience all its own if you've never cut fresh corn off the cob. You know, if you don't do it right, so you got corn, you know, shooting on the ceiling and out your ears. If you learn how to do it right, where you can control it over the bowl and actually get the corn off the cob and into the bowl, and you know, it's a learning experience, and you have to be motivated to do that. So the first year we did it, we got, you know, some corn, and we ate the corn, and we ate corn until we had corn growing out of our ears, and then we, you know, the next year we saved some corn by learning to freeze it, and then the next year, it's like it was so good, when we ran out we were sad. So when the corn came, you know, into season at a farmer's market, I tried to get, you know, well, this time I'm going to get 3 bags of corn, and we're going to freeze some. And then the next year it was, you know, like 10 bags of corn. The next year it's like, well, how much corn do we need to last this year? Because we do not like running out of corn and ending up with that nasty stuff in the can that's, you know, has no flavor. It's like, you know, what are we going to do? And so that's how it kind of progressed. And it progressed in a lot of ways. It started with the corn, and it started with sewing, and it started with canning, and then I got a dehydrator. My first dehydrator was a one of those round ones that's a American Harvest dehydrator. Somebody had it at a garage sale for $10. You know, and it's one of those things, they probably got it as a gift, and the person that gave it to them thought it was wonderful, and they had no use for it. You know, they're not in that mindset. They're not a homesteader, and so they sold it at the garage sale for $10. And I learned to dehydrate the corn, and that was amazing because it gets so little bitty, and you can just put it in a container and save it, and then the next time you cook with it, you know, it just comes right back like real corn, and it's like, wow. So, you know, we started doing that, and I had that dehydrator for 25 years, and I used it. I mean, I kept learning more. You know, the first time you get it, oh, well, I can make beef jerky. You know, that's great. Well, then, hey, I can do corn, and I can do onions, and I can do celery, and I can do, you know, and you just keep adding to it, and you just keep adding to it, and you get more and more use out of it. And then one day, you know, when you've got your second dehydrator, and they've just all been going with all their racks full blast, and you're like, how did I ever live without a dehydrator? You know, how do you do that? So that's another step in this madness, or whatever you want to call it. Each person has, you know, where they're going, where they're heading, where they're comfortable. You know, some people may not want to ever raise chickens to eat. Fine, you know, I get that. They could never stand to kill the poor little bird so that they could eat it. But if they're the homesteader mindset, they may be interested in finding a farmer who will. They may be interested in you know, helping out, getting that animal that's been raised on grass and treated right its whole life. And you know, it just starts someplace and it goes on. In those early years when we were still in the apartment, and we had like one little laundry room thing in the back of that apartment, so we did have our own laundry room, and we had a deep freeze. And I remember a friend of ours was getting some beef, and there's a local place just, you know, down the road from us, and some of these places, it's like they're there. You may have to hunt for them, but unless you're in a hugely populated place like New York City or something like that, you probably would find, if you look within 100 miles of you anyway, a processor that will process animals for farmers. And oftentimes those little places like that will sell meat. So we started by buying a little bit of meat. You know, we would go there and they would have meat packages, and you could get some hamburger and some you know, steaks and some pork chops and, you know, whatever, and you'd buy that package and bring it home and put it in the freezer. And it was about the same cost as if you go to the grocery store and buy it, but it's not I need a pound of hamburger, I have to go to the grocery store and buy the pound of hamburger so that I can bring it straight home and cook the pound of hamburger and, you know, do that. We were buying, you know, 20 pounds of hamburger. And then when I needed hamburger, it was right there in the freezer. And then you eat that because, you know, you bought it already and you thought, well, that was kind of a fun experiment, and you buy it and you eat it, and you cook your hamburger up in the pan, and it tastes so yummy when you're making your chili or whatever. And then you run out and you go to the grocery store and you buy the hamburger and you bring it back and you put it in the pan, and you have a little bit of hamburger and a whole bunch of grease. And the hamburger just doesn't taste as good. And then you go, uh-oh, I need some more of that other hamburger. So you go back to the farm store, and then it gets to be, you get to where you learn, hey, you know, hamburger is not supposed to be, you know, soaking in a puddle of grease that I'm pouring out and getting rid of all the time. The hamburger at the farm store is, you know, when you buy a pound of hamburger, you almost have a pound of hamburger when you're done. I very seldom ever have to drain the grease before I make a recipe because there just isn't the grease, you know, and it tastes good, and it's comes frozen in its little package, and it's handy when I need it. And you know, we were taking a trip as things progressed. We would take a trip with the kids when they were little, and we would go to the farm store and we would buy, you know, the meat or whatever, and then we would also, there was a place that was near us that had a little roadside orchard stand where you could buy fresh peaches and things like that. And then just down the road from that, and this is in a little farming town that's close to us but wasn't by us, so it had to be like a weekend excursion type thing where we would, you know, go on a Saturday morning and drive and drive and drive and take the kids and do this little fun thing. We would come back, and on the way back there was a place where the guys had bees, and they had a little shop set up, and they had a hive that you could see the colony of the bees in the hive, and they had a little tube that went out the door of the building, and you could see the bees coming and going and coming and going, and then they sold honey at the store. So whenever we would need meat, we would plan it for a day's excursion, and we would drive to the little place, and we would buy the meat with our cooler in the back of the car, and we would swing by and we would get the peaches or whatever farm produce was in season, and we would never get a lot. We would just get enough to maybe eat a couple meals out of it and so forth. And then we would go by the honey place, and the kids would see the honeybees, and then we would come home and back to our little apartment living life, and life would go on. And then it progresses. And I found out, you know, hey, these people are custom processors, these people that I buy meat from. And if I buy an actual cow, or I think it started with a sheep. I bought a sheep. And I bought the sheep, and they delivered it, the people that I bought the sheep from delivered it to the farm store. And so I paid the sheep people, and then they had a date set up. And of course, at that point in your existence, you're going, uh-oh, I've just given a whole bunch of money to these people, and then I'm never going to see anything for it. But they took the sheep to the farm butcher shop, and they butchered the sheep, and then we had a date set up, and we went to the butcher shop, and we picked up the sheep in paper, wrapped up in little packages. And I never met my sheep, you know, never knew the guy, and just knew this farmer, and knew that they had the sheep, and talked to the farmer about him, but I didn't know that, you know, this little brown one was the one that I was going to eat. And, you know, brought it back from the farm store, and I'm like impressed, because it's like I have lamb, which we don't get around here very often, and this, you know, most people, it's just not at the grocery store. And I could get it for the same price as I got regular hamburger, pretty much. And I had a whole freezer full of it, and I was like, wow, you know. And then I met, you know, talking to people, and just meeting, you know, every time you meet somebody, hey, they're as weird as I am. And this is back before there was YouTube. You know, this is still in the 80s. There was those weird people that went off and lived in Alaska in the late 70s and stuff. And, you know, I was a subscriber to Mother Earth News, because that was the one out there. But that there was not these weird people online with a homestead community back then. So it was just me, and I'm weird. You know, I'm not a farmer because I live in an apartment. You know, but I'm not normal. And I meet people, and I find a woman that, you know, she was raising pigs, and she would, you know, she was a step ahead of this whole game than me. She would raise some pigs, and at first she was buying feeder pigs from a real farmer. And she would buy, you know, 5 feeder pigs. And, well, started out, I think, with 2. And she found out that if she would buy a pig, or 2 pigs, and raise them just over the summer, and feed them all of her scraps that she had, because she was a gardener, too, and then she could sell 1 pig and eat 1 pig, and the pigs she sold would pay for the pigs she ate. And so then, you know, by the time I met her, she was buying, you know, 5 pigs. And she later on went to where she was raising pigs to buy and to have to. And so it was like her progression, but I was like a step behind her. So I met her. So she started custom raising me a pig. She would raise, you know, get her 2 pigs, and she'd say, hey, I'm getting a couple pigs. Would you like a pig? And I would buy them when they were ready to sell, and she would take them to the farm store, and I would pick up the pork and the bacon and bring it home. And it just keeps going, and it keeps going, and it keeps going. And, you know, at that point, even a little bit before that point, my husband, who's not the homesteader, would say, well, how much is this costing? You know, how much is this costing? Because, you know, he's practical. He's the one who goes to work every day, and he's the one who's always making sure that, you know, our family didn't starve to death and die. So he didn't want me to just blow money, and we did not have money to just blow either, because when we had kids, then I kind of quit working, other than just little part-time jobs here and there, and I stayed home with the kids, so we really didn't have money. And he would say, well, you know, how much is this? How much is this? And so he would start kind of holding me accountable, you know.